commercial vehicle obviously is a very big part of every economy in developed worlds as well as developing world. And what we are seeing now is tremendous changes, tremendous technology being brought into these commercial vehicles in both developed markets, and eventually I expect that a lot of that will actually filter down to the developing markets as well. So for example, in the US, we see commercial vehicles that are being hybrid. So some of the big OEMs are building hybrid solutions. Obviously, there's a big discussion around autonomous trucks that will be of big magnitude sales in the future. We will see a lot of companies, including Tesla, getting very actively involved in it. Having said that, obviously, there's a lot of issues, challenges, legislation that will be required, both at the federal level as well as the state level, to ensure that these trucks, when they are on the road, are safe, are secure. There's a mechanism to make sure that in the event of a fatality or an accident, who is responsible for it? Is it the truck owner? Is it the insurance company? Is it the technology provider within the company? So these are some interesting challenges that are currently facing these kinds of solutions. Obviously, over time, many of these solutions will get resolved, and hopefully as they get resolved, these will get implemented very effectively in a country like US for sure. Also, what you have to remember is all these solutions have tremendous application, and why this is becoming more and more important is because with the significant upside, especially on the e-commerce business, we are finding that the last mile delivery, the movement of goods have actually increased multifold. And with e-commerce expected to double and quadruple in the coming years, you will see tremendous growth opportunities, especially in the commercial vehicle in the United States for sure. And as e-commerce and other activities happen, we will see a lot more happening in other parts of the world as well. From a technology standpoint, I think the emphasis is still on driver safety, driver health, wellness, and well-being. These are very important elements. Obviously, driver productivity becomes very important because more the asset is used, the more the asset is sweat, the more returns an investor gets from their investment. So a lot of emphasis is being given for building that capability into the trucks by the OEMs. What is also interestingly happening is as the mix of men and women in the trucking industry changes, the trucks are now being designed to also accommodate the needs of women, because most trucks, whether it's commercial vehicles, including even passenger cars, are built primarily for men because they are considered as the largest driving segment. But we are beginning to see a shift both in the passenger car business as well as in the commercial vehicle, that more and more women are involved. In fact, in the United States, there's data that indicates that women on average drive vehicles longer than men drive today. So, but the cars are designed for men. They are rough. They are with long distances, and women need that softness, that touchy-feely. So a lot of the vehicles are now being designed that way, and you're going to see many of those changes coming into the commercial vehicle as well, because more and more women are getting into that workforce, driving trucks and commercial vehicles across the country as well. So I think you're going to see this industry transform. You're going to see platforms change. You're going to see technologies change. You're going to see technologies coming inside the vehicle changing. And very soon, just like you will have connected cars, you will also have connected trucks in the US and of course in other parts of the world as well. Now, if we shift our focus from developed economies, whether it's the US or even the European countries, into the developing areas, and obviously India is a very, very important market segment. It's one of the growing segments, and what we are seeing is that many of these technologies will begin to eventually percolate in the Indian context as well. I think they'll start mostly from safety perspective, They will start from convenience perspective, comfort perspective. Most of the commercial vehicles in India, for example, at the very simple level, do not have air conditioning. What that does is increases the fatigue of a driver, and as a result, productivity is less. The driver needs to take frequent breaks, frequent rests, just to recharge themselves. So as these elements come into the OEM products in this country, we will see driver productivity improve, fatigue levels go down, so the vehicle will be more in operation and thereby giving a better return on investment to fleet owners. What we will also see is as India moves from the current Bharat SE4 level to BSE 6 level, what you're going to see is very soon that the product development here will become a lot more interesting, a lot more exciting for OEMs here, because now they can take this and develop a product that is suitable not only for the developing market but also for the developed market. So once they get to the Euro 6 standards, I think the whole concept will change quite dramatically. And I think what we'll see, the commercial vehicle industry in India growing quite nicely, with many of the technologies coming into this environment as well. What we'll also see is that the revenue mix will change over time. Today, a lot of the revenues come from products, from the actual sale of commercial vehicles and after-sales service. But I think there'll be a lot of value-added services that will begin to emerge, especially in countries like India, where there's a lot of inefficiency in actually repairing and maintaining the vehicles, because the environment is not conducive for long term. There's a lot more wear and tear you see here compared to wear and tear in other parts of the world. So what we're going to see is that many OEMs will start to deliver service to the end customer and to the fleet owner. The benefit being it reduces downtime, it improves the uptime, so you will see better efficiency, better productivity, and better usage of that asset that the companies are investing in. So we will see these new business models emerge, and these will be additional revenue streams. At the same time, it will also provide the convenience and comfort to the end customer as well. So that is what will change the mix of revenues from product to services and value-added services as well. I think additional business models that could be generated is the data that will come out of all these vehicles. We're going to see a lot more data that will be coming out of these vehicles that then can be used, analyzed, and help in developing strategies for optimal route mapping, load pickups, etc., which again add to the bottom line of fleet manufacturers. So I think we are going through some incredible change, and the business models are changing, so it's no longer just the product itself, but it's service, it's data, and other value-added services that will come in as well. I think many technologies that we are seeing that are now becoming quite common are in the areas of artificial intelligence, in the areas of IoT, big data. So the vehicle will be a lot more connected inside as well as connected with the infrastructure, and we'll see that will have, again, profound effect in how these vehicles will move from point A to point B. So I think we're seeing some fantastic opportunities in this industry. Obviously, companies have to prepare themselves for this and move on. While all these opportunities are happening, there are some traditional OEMs, especially some of the big OEMs from overseas that had made big commitments, investments in a country like India. For example, MAN and Scania. I know we've heard that they are likely to exit. In fact, I think they've already made their decision to exit the Indian market. And the background to this is because they believe that in their global strategy, it is easier for them to handle the product development for some of the overseas market at this time, and within that the Indian context doesn't fit in. Having said that, it does not mean that they will completely disappear. They will continue to provide, of course, service and support to clients who have bought products on them for the next 5 years for sure. But I think what will happen is, it is quite possible they will re-enter and re-engage in this market in some other form in the future, because the reality is Indian market will continuously increase and grow as many of the drivers will start to increase based on many of the government initiatives, including of course e-commerce sales, that I still think is in the very early stages. And as internet penetration increases from current 35% to 54.4%, which is the global standard, you'll see more and more e-commerce. And as more and more e-commerce happens and as penetration continues to increase, you'll need a lot of movement of goods and in a timely way, in a last mile delivery way, very, very quickly. So I think this market is poised for good growth. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think with good technology coming here, we will see a tremendous increase in productivity and efficiency of the fleets as well. Thank you.
You touched upon the driver bit in the very beginning of your earlier answer. How important is going to be the driver when we're talking about autonomous trucks on the horizon in the markets which are practically tuned to dealing with such human beings as part of the business cycle?
So I think we know autonomous driving, whether it is for passenger cars or commercial vehicle, is under significant development. Lots of investments happening all over the world. US, of course, in European countries, China is putting a lot of investment in that as well. Having said that, I think the whole concept of autonomous is going to take a much longer than we actually anticipate. Our current estimate is 2025, maybe in the 2025-2030 range. So it's a good 5-10 years away from full implementation of autonomous vehicles. So from now till then, the driver still remains a very important, integral part of that entire ecosystem. And making sure that the driver has the comfort, has the convenience, driver's health, wellness and well-being is monitored, is provided for, is a critical component of making sure that these modes of transportation are used effectively, used efficiently with high degree of productivity, so that the investments that fleet managers make, investments e-commerce companies make, gets returns in the shortest possible time. So I don't think the driver is going to disappear. Even when first phases of autonomous vehicles come into the picture, it will still have a driver, because for people to feel 100% comfortable that this is the way of the future, it's going to take much longer than people anticipate. And as we discussed, there are many other surrounding issues related to legislation and government policies that have to be also factored in to building this ecosystem that is sustainable for the long term.
Does that mean some technology still has a certain limitation, however it may percolate into a certain sector, industrial sector, or into a certain manufactured product? Does it still have a limitation as to how it relates to a human being, relates to the environment? Because you spoke about AI and IoT coming in a big way. How do you see that scenario shaping up?
As with anything, there is always a barrier, there is always a limitation, and same is true with technology as well. It's an enabler, it's a disruptor, but at the end of the day, for a given application, every technology has its limits, and we will see that in every aspect of the world, the connected world in which we are living, and that is true for commercial vehicles as well. So we will always have certain limitations, and which is why immediate implementation of these fascinating technologies will not happen. It is going to take time, and with all these, as we've seen even in commercial aerospace, it takes time. One has to build a lot of redundancy, multiple redundancies, because failure can be catastrophic in these kinds of environment, and that's why these will take time to develop. But clearly, as technologies develop, it'll get safer, it'll get better, it'll be easy to control, it'll be easy to manage the whole system. But I think we're years away from getting to that stage of efficiency and safety. And so I think you'll see limitation. Technology still has to go. Even AI, for example, the technology I mentioned about, which will pretty much hit every part of the commercial vehicle as well, is still in very early stages of development. There's a lot of testing, a lot of user cases we will need to ensure that these technologies deliver to the promise that they hold. And again, as I said, they will all have certain levels of limitation, but within the context of what we want to do, I think they can definitely serve a lot of purpose.
The kind of regulations we're seeing in India for the commercial also for the commercial vehicle industry, is that the kind of scenario that you see emerging on a global level, or is it? And what is your opinion whether it is the government who should shape it up, or whether it should be the market forces who should drive a change?
I think I'm seeing this is a common phenomenon. Whether we like it or not, I mean, governments play a very important role because they are the so-called neutral body, a body that can help and not only develop the policy but also help implement and monitor the policy, and if need be, change the policy. Obviously, interactivity with the ecosystem is essential, because to make any policy work, to make a policy that's an enabler, not a disruptor, you have to have interaction with the industry. Yeah? So I don't think any policy should be developed by any government without direct involvement of the industry and making sure the industry has its inputs and fingerprint on that policy. But I would say pretty much most governments in most countries are the drivers of these policies, because they are by nature a neutral body, and they have an obligation to not only protect the industry, but an obligation to protect the entire ecosystem, because as we know, in any country there are multiple stakeholders, and you want to make sure every stakeholder is protected when you implement a policy, and that's why governments are in best position to do that.
So where do the market forces stand? I mean, how do you see market forces acting in such a situation, where at one end the government is trying to protect the interest of the various stakeholders involved, ensure that a certain shape and a certain direction is attained for the future.
So I think, as I mentioned, I mean, obviously when I talk about industry, I talk about the people who make the products, provide the services to the end customer. And when they provide an input to the government, they provide it based also on a lot of feedback they receive from their customers, right? So there is always a connection between the people who make and the people who consume. That connection is what then gets delivered to the government. So I think the market forces are kind of embedded in the feedback that the manufacturers, the OEMs provide to the government, and those definitely help in changing. And that's why you will notice multiple versions of any policy that the government comes up, and that's actually with feedback coming from the OEMs, understanding the supply chain, understanding other external factors, whether it's price of oil, whether it's foreign exchange impact, trade barriers. All these start to play a role in shaping the government's policy, and it also includes the feedback from the end customer to say what's working, what's not working, why certain changes need to happen as well. So I think it's an interactive process. Governments who really get these people involved see the power of this happening.
You spoke about the multiple revisions that the government is taking in a positive light, but we've talked to certain global players who say that there is a certain amount of unpredictability, that the government keeps back changing the same notification that probably they would have brought out. So those multiple revisions make it hard from the business standpoint. You know, how do OEMs decide this strategy or a 3-year or a 5-year roadmap when you know that the government might just come back and revise something else, taking feedback into consideration? How do you look at that?
Certainly. I mean, stability, well, it goes back to stability of government, which is very important. And invariably when, there's a change in government, there's also a risk of change in policy. So that's one reason why you will see multiple changes happening. At the same time, as I said, government does have the responsibility of looking at not one industry, but looking at all the stakeholders that surround that industry as well. So sometimes there is a myopic view that an industry provides and says, this is what we want, but they don't fully understand the implications that any policy has with other industries as well. So I think you have to holistically understand that and of course prepare for it. But at the same time, I think again, if there is a change and the frequency of change is very high and that has a negative impact, that's when industry bodies, industry associations are created to actually provide a perspective and lobby with the government to say why a policy change has a negative impact to what it for that particular industry. So I think it's an interactive process. It needs to be done, and it happens in every part of the world where the industry bodies have a direct chair on the table of all these government institutions, and the government recognizes the power is when they are interacting with the industry.
You spoke about fuel, which today is quite an important entity for the operation of this industry, where freight rates are probably not changing as fast in proportion to the fuel price rise. Some years back, there was this big talk about US changing, leaving its reliance on fossil fuel and moving to shale gas. How do you see such currents? Even the quest for alternate fuel, where countries like Russia are banking hugely on gas. How do you look at such currents flowing across the globe? Different countries trying to align with different kind of fuels that are probably locally available in abundance, and how practically that scenario could shape up industry in a given continent or a subcontinent.
So you're right. I mean, this is now one of the most important geopolitical trends that we are seeing worldwide, because fuel, whether it is generated through fossil fuel or through other methods like shale, etc., has definitely had a massive impact worldwide. US, that was a net importer, now is a net exporter, right? And obviously it's a country that was the largest consumer of fossil fuel. Now what has that done? That has completely disrupted the whole oil industry, including the OPEC based countries worldwide. We saw barrel oil prices and barrel prices plummet from over $120 to around $35 to $40. They're picking up again. Then comes trade barriers. So clearly, this is one of the most important geopolitical disruptions that we are seeing. Clearly, countries like US that have understood this have now recognized that they cannot depend on fossil fuel all the time. So they now have these alternative solutions, and obviously that is completely transforming the economics of that country and economics of their business completely. Countries like India that are still very heavily dependent on fossil fuel are unfortunately being hit almost like a tidal wave, and that's one of the reasons why, because of the trade imbalance, you are seeing Indian currency under tremendous pressure against the US dollar, and we continue to obviously see that negative effect happening, which will of course lead to other challenges like inflation, etc. So in the short term, there is no answer, simply, especially for emerging markets, because that alternative technology or solution is not available. Therefore, the dependence on traditional fossil fuel remains, and as long as that remains in a country like India, India will continue to have this vagaries in its economic situation because of the dependence on oil. Obviously, over time that will stabilize, and once they start to stabilize, then we'll see some resemblance of stability in this country. But I think in the short term there is volatility, and given the political changes, given the embargoes that are coming in right now, and more demand from countries like US to countries like Saudi Arabia to more actively get involved in sharing costs, and especially for a country like Saudi, the only way they can pay for all that is through oil production, higher price increases, and with embargoes, this trend will continue. So we expect oil prices to even go up, and when that happens, that has negative impact for a country like India. So I think those countries, especially in the Western world, that have alternative solution will be less impacted with this change. In fact, they're enjoying the benefits of it, but those that don't, mostly in the emerging markets, will suffer in the short term.
Traditionally, commercial vehicles have been using diesel as a fuel,
Yes.
and diesel has lately come under a lot of criticism. What kind of change do you see at that level, and how will it affect the future of the CV industry, as well as how the operators look at the TCO, the total cost of operation for a truck that they have?
So clearly, we will see, with all these geopolitical situations, that the cost of fuel will keep rising. Obviously, there is more work being done, more R&D being done to make the fuel a lot better, more combustible, less pollution. So we're seeing the quality of fuel also improve. So with that, we will see less wear and tear, we'll see less maintenance required, but we will see cost of fuel going up, okay? At the same time, cost of maintenance going down. So all in all, with those and with efficiencies where the driver now is a lot more productive than before, we expect that over the next 5 to 7 years, the overall cost of ownership, the cost of management of that fleet will increase, but increase marginally. So we're going to see some pluses, some minuses, but overall it will be minor. Therefore, still making it economically viable to continue the investment in building capacity. Because on the other end, as I mentioned, there is so much happening on the technology side, so much happening on the customer side, so much happening on the consumer side, that the demand and the need for movement of goods is only going to increase, and therefore there will be a demand and need for commercial vehicles to support that need and the demand that is being generated by consumers across the country.
That's where a lot of inefficiencies are being taken out and processes being made more efficient.
Yes. In every in the whole, I would even extend that logic to the whole logistics industry. As I mentioned in my presentation earlier today, almost every part of the logistics industry, from end to end, from door to door, as I like to call it, is being transformed, is being made better, is being done cheaper, better, faster. So when you see that happening, that whole industry is going to go through a complete overall change. More new participants will come in. Last mile delivery will get better. We'll get better products on a timely basis, safer to our doorstep. So yes, all of this you will see happening very, very shortly now.
Startups and aggregators, what role do you see them playing in minimizing or eliminating the inefficiencies in the system?
I think startups are the drivers of that, because the way to handle all this is through startups, and that's why you notice if you look at the entire value chain and you look at the subcomponents of this industry through that value chain, most of it is being disrupted by startups, because startups understand there's a challenge and they see solutions that they can provide, leveraging technology which is cheaper, better, faster. So in my opinion, startups are the drivers of reducing these inefficiencies that we are seeing. Over time, many of these startups will probably either merge, get aggregated, and may come together under one umbrella, so that it becomes more seamless. Rather than dealing with 20 different companies, you probably deal with 1 or 2 aggregators. That will happen, but I can tell you this change is being driven to a large extent by startups.
So they need to be taken seriously.
They are very important. They are going to be a big, big disruptor. Don't ignore them. See ways in which you can potentially partner with them, form alliances, and potentially even acquire them.
There's also this talk about IC engines costs going up as they become cleaner and better, more efficient, whereupon the battery costs coming down to for the promotion of electric propulsion in a big way. Again, that seems to have a geopolitical angle to it. How do you look at these two things balancing each other, or probably coexisting or complementing each other, trying to get one technology, trying to get the other out of the way? How do you look at that conflict or that situation developing?
So, as we know in any industry, many things will change. We know that change is constant, as I call it.
Yes.
But this is a transformation, and what I mean by that is your traditional IC-based commercial vehicles will continue to exist. First in large numbers. we will see obviously other forms of technology, whether it's hybrid, whether it's electric vehicle, autonomous cars, things like that will start to come in terms of commercial vehicles. We'll see that happening for sure. But I think these will both coexist. And what you'll see on the IC side, better efficiencies, higher mileage, low fuel consumption, low emissions. At the same time, the battery cost will also go down, making it economically viable. But battery technology still has certain limitations. It cannot propel a vehicle, endlessly from point A to point B. It needs to get a charge. High-speed charging will be becoming very important. Putting that infrastructure will take time. So I think both of these will coexist in certain applications. Battery technology, electric vehicle will be a better solution, but in many areas, IC-based vehicles will be a better solution. And so I think both will coexist. For longer distance travel, I think it will be the IC. For shorter distance, within cities, within urban environments, I think electric will be the way to go forward. So I think both will coexist in my opinion.
In this conflict, where do suppliers stand? We know you work with a lot of suppliers globally and even in India. Kaushik works with a lot of suppliers, he tells me. Where do they stand in this conflict? I mean, today a lot of the supplier industry is aligned towards IC engines and a conventional way of vehicle manufacture. This kind of conflict and situation, where do they really need to look at? How do they need to plan their future in terms of sustenance, in terms of growth?
Clearly, as I mentioned earlier, both will exist. I mean, what we are seeing, globally, the phenomena is towards, clean usage of fuel, using electric vehicle, reducing pollution. Global warming is a very important component of all of this, right? So, I think, and more consumers, more and more corporates are aligning towards being more environmentally responsible, socially more responsible, which means the need for electric vehicles will be a lot more important in the future. So for an OEM, if you are a traditional IC-based OEM, it makes perfect sense to start looking at a product development solution that also includes electric vehicle as a part of their portfolio. And if they're not doing it themselves, maybe the better way to do is to either partner with somebody, acquire their technology from somebody, including acquire the company altogether. But having a mix of both is equally important, because for certain applications, IC will always be the solution, and for certain applications, shorter duration, in and out, and in big cities, the electric vehicle solution will exist. So the combination of both, it will be required for every OEM moving forward.
By suppliers, I meant the component suppliers.
So the OEMs will demand that. The suppliers, again, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, have to obviously build capacity to serve the needs of both these products, right? So they'll have to transform themselves because the need of the products changes. Of course, if the ratio of electric vehicle to ICs change, this is much greater than the other, then it does have a major impact on the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. Yeah, investments change, the volumes change, and the need for the number of components that you need also change, right? So yes, that will be very disruptive in the industry, and they have to be prepared to provide products that better fit the electric vehicle type. But yes, then in that case, this industry will see some massive transformation.
Last question. There's this huge, massive oil industry that came up alongside the automobile industry. The way the growth was almost in proportion of each industry. Now, as we talk about alternate fuels, we talk about electric, there seems to be a huge new other industry that is poised to grow as electrics grow, or as other alternate fuels like biofuels or other things go. So, how will this happen? What kind of place will this massive other new industry players that will come in will create, and how will they all be accommodated?
Okay. Obviously, what's happening clearly is as these different types of technologies start to come in, these different products start to come in, the traditional fossil-based, oil-based products and products that were being used within the industry is going to reduce over time. That is the reality, and which is why you're seeing such massive changes in oil-producing nations. That consumption is going to go down. New entrants will come, new players will come. These economies, these countries that are dependent on this will have to transform. They'll have to look at other ways and means of how to build sustainable economies, solutions, etc. So you're going to see a lot of that happening. So I think you will see some disruption on this side. At the same time, new players, new entrants, new systems will start to come in, new ecosystems will start to get developed, and you'll see a lot more growth in that area compared to the traditional area. But as I also say, what may happen as we look into the future is, depending on how the whole logistics industry evolves and develops, and how warehousing gets part of it, and how countries are able to manage that process effectively, you may still need a fleet of larger vehicles that have to go long distances across country, point A to point B, and so for that, the traditional fuel will still be required. So I think lots of unknowns, lots of things are happening. I can't tell you exactly which way it will end up going, but I think it is safe to assume that the consumption of the traditional fuels will decline over time. I think that is a given. At what rate, at what percentage, one doesn't know today, but I think that trend is definitely going on the decline side, while other technologies, other alternates are definitely going to increase on the other side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I hope I answered.
Yes. No, because you bring in the